Hey bakers, it's Mel, and I'm in the studio today making chocolate milk bread. What happens when they ask a pastry chef to make a bread? I put chocolate chips in it and sugar on top. Find the recipe link in the description. To start our Tangzhong, we are going to add 11 grams of black cocoa, along with 11 grams of Dutch processed cocoa, and 11 grams of bread flour. I'm gonna grab my whisk and mix those together just to break up some of the lumps. And then we're gonna add our liquid to this. I'm gonna start with 70 grams of cold whole milk, and then add 70 grams of cold water. I'm gonna give this another whisk just to get those powders dissolved into the liquid, and then we'll turn our heat on to low. Right, we're gonna continue whisking this the entire time. You can kind of keep an eye on your heat. If your low setting is really, really low and nothing is happening, you can go ahead and turn it up a little bit, somewhere between low and medium low. We're wanting to make sure to get all of the powder, kind of the cocoa powder and the flour off the side. So if you need to use a spatula to do that, go ahead. So we're whisking until we don't see any lumps, and then we're gonna continue whisking. So you're probably familiar with our traditional Japanese milk bread that uses the Tangzhong method and just has the flour, milk, and water. Because we're making this chocolate milk bread, we have the addition of cocoa. And when I was first developing this recipe, I had added the cocoa just directly to the other dry ingredients when we were making the dough. But what I found is that the cocoa absorbed a lot of moisture from the bread, and it wasn't as fluffy and soft as I wanted it to be. So I started thinking, where can we add that cocoa so that it absorbs a lot of liquid and it won't take any liquid from the final dough itself? In this Tangzhong method, we're adding both the cocos and our flour so that they can hydrate. As we cook them, the starches in both the flour and the cocoa start to gelatinize, and that means they're absorbing water. So kind of those starches swell, and it holds on to the moisture so that when we eventually put this into our dough, it keeps our dough really nice and soft and fluffy. This process will take about 3 to 6 minutes. What we're looking for is our cocoa mixture to be about the consistency of hot fudge sauce. So right now it's still very thin, almost looks like hot cocoa right now. And we're just gonna keep whisking over that low heat until it starts to come to a boil, and then we'll start to thicken. And as you start to see the steam coming up from your pot, that means that it is getting ready to boil. As I'm whisking also, I can feel that it's starting to get a little more viscous, a little thicker. I can start to see some of the revolutions in the very center of my pot here as I'm whisking. So we are getting close to it coming to a boil and thickening to that hot fudge consistency. Right, as you're whisking this in that 3 to 6 minute time period, you may be thinking, can I just jack the heat up and make this go faster? And while you can do that, you have to be a little careful because cocoa burns very easily. So making sure you're whisking constantly, and you can adjust your heat up and down. I wouldn't leave it on, medium or high the whole time, but if it's taking forever, you can go ahead and play with your heat a little bit. All right, so we're just about there. I'm gonna go ahead and turn my heat off here. And then we can take a look at our consistency. So kind of when I pull this out, you can see it drizzles like fudge sauce. If you had a nice big bowl of ice cream, you can drizzle that just like fudge sauce. It's nice and glossy, and as it starts to sit, it will start to set up a little bit more even and get thicker and thicker. We're looking to have about 145 grams of this mixture, and that will let you know if you weigh it, if you have evaporated enough of the moisture out of here. But if you have that nice thick fudge sauce consistency, you should be good. Right, we're gonna bring our mixture over and get it into our mixing bowl. I'm gonna switch over to a spatula here just to make sure I can scrape everything out of the bottom of my pan. And you can see how quick that mixture really thickens up as it sits. All right, I have my cocoa Tangzhong in the bowl, and to that I'm going to add 219 grams of bread flour. So we're using bread flour in this recipe because this is an enriched bread. It has all of those good things. Eventually you'll see we're gonna be adding sugar and butter and egg, and all of those things kind of cut down on gluten development. And so by using bread flour, which automatically has more gluten in it than all-purpose flour, our bread will rise nice and high and be nice and soft and fluffy for us. Next, I'm gonna put my milk in. So we're using whole milk again. So I have 70 grams of warm milk. I have 41 grams of granulated sugar. Next, we have 10 grams of dry milk powder going in. So if you don't have milk powder, don't worry about it. It's an optional ingredient. But if you do have it, it's great to put it in because it's adding more protein, more milk solids, more sugar, all of those things that will help make a nice, soft, fluffy milk bread. I have 7 grams of instant yeast and 5 grams of salt. Those are all of our dry ingredients. Now we're gonna add again those nice enriching agents. So I have 43 grams of melted unsalted butter. And then for my egg, I'm gonna be using about 41 grams or 3 tablespoons of my egg. So I'm just gonna scramble up my eggs. We wanna make sure we're getting equal amounts of the egg white and egg yolk in here. Right, just gonna tear out my scale. And again, we're going for 41 grams. If you get a few grams over or under, totally fine. All right, so I'm at 40, I'm gonna stop there. We'll save the rest for brushing on later. All right, I'm gonna get my bowl on my mixer. We're gonna be using our dough hook for this dough. And I'm gonna start on a low speed just to get our ingredients combined. This is a small amount of dough in the 7-quart mixer, so it may take a little bit to get started, but once everything starts mixing, we'll be able to scrape down and then it'll be much easier for our dough to mix. All right, my dough is now done. When I look in my mixer, I can see that it has pulled away from the sides of the bowl. It's still just a little bit tacky, but definitely much easier to work with than when we first started mixing our ingredients together. So now we're gonna add our chocolate chips. I have 75 grams of semi-sweet chocolate chips that I'm adding. All right, as you can hear, I have some stragglers in my bowl that aren't quite mixing into my dough. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my bowl off my mixer and just knead them in by hand. And just kind of fold the dough over itself. We're just trying to get those last little bit of chocolate chips worked in. We are going to get this into our dough rising bucket. I'm gonna give it a little spray of nonstick spray just so it doesn't stick when we're ready to work with it. And our dough is gonna go right in. We're gonna set this dough aside, make sure that it's covered, and it will rise for about 1 to 1.5 hours. It should be nice and puffy and doubled in size. All right, before we shape our dough, I'm gonna go ahead and get my pan prepared. I have an 8.5 by 4.5 inch loaf pan here that I'm gonna spray with a little bit of nonstick spray. Make sure that everything comes out easily for us. And then we're gonna check on our dough and make sure that it has doubled in size and is nice and puffy. And to do that, I'm gonna take my lid off and grab a little bit of flour on my finger just because it's a little sticky. And then I'm just gonna touch it gently. And what I'm looking for is that it leaves a little indentation that just slowly fills back in. All right, I'm gonna lightly flour my surface here with a little bit of our bread flour. And then I'm gonna get my dough right out onto my counter. Because we greased it, it should slide right out. You can see how nice and puffy it is with all those bubbles in there. We're gonna divide this into 4 even pieces. It should be about 160 grams. You can always weigh your full amount of dough and then divide that, and it might be a little under or over 160 grams. So I'm just gonna use my bench knife here to divide it into 4 pieces, and then we'll see where we are weight-wise. One reason I like to actually weigh these if I can is that when they are rolled up in our pan, we want it to rise evenly. So if I have one piece that's, say, 10 or 20 grams more dough than the other, it might be a lot larger, but we'll see how it goes. Right, I'm gonna pat this down into a rectangle that's about 4 by 6. So if you have a ruler, you can go ahead and grab one. Otherwise, your bench knife is 6 inches across, so you can use that as your measurement tool. So I'm just going to get all of the air out of my dough here. So you can just shape it and stretch it as you need to get it into that 4 by 6 rectangle. Again, I'm gonna use my bench knife, so I see I'm at 6 here and about 4 there, exactly what I need. I'm gonna bring my ends together so that they meet in the center and then just press down. And we're gonna be rolling this up the short end, and so I'm gonna switch my dough here so it's easier for me to work directly in front of me. Make sure it's as squared off as it can be. If you have a little renegade chocolate chip, you can just poke it right back in. And now I have about a 3 by 5 inch rectangle. And I'm just going to gently roll this up. Once I get to the end here, I'm going to go ahead and pinch my ends together. And I can see that one side of this is a little bit thicker with dough than the other. So I'm going to try and work the dough just a little bit to make it a little more even. If you have your edges squishing out, you can kind of stick those back in again. Right, and I'm going to bring my prepared pan over here. We want to make sure these go seam side down in the pan, and we're going to line them up 4 in a row here. So I have my seam side going right in. Once you have everything in your pan, just make sure they're evenly spaced in there so they have a good area to rise in, that one's not really far in the corner and one's a little bit towards the center. So we're going to go ahead and cover this now so our dough doesn't dry out. This is going to rise for 45 to 90 minutes or until the top of the dough just crests over the edge of the pan. Towards the end of that rising time, be sure to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. All right, our loaf is nicely proofed. I'm going to gently take our cover off here, and you can see it's nice and domed right over the edge of our pan. So to double check that our loaf is fully proofed, I'm gonna do the doorbell test. So that is taking our finger and doing a little poke in the side. It should leave an indentation and then slowly fill back in. We're going to go ahead and put our egg wash on now, and our egg wash is going to do a couple things for us. One is it's going to be the glue that's going to help our sparkling sugar adhere. It also does a couple other things. One is it will leave the top of our loaf really nice and glossy, so it's going to look beautiful when it comes out of the oven. The other thing it does is keep the top of our loaf moist, so when it does go in the oven, we can get that really nice oven spring before the top of it actually sets. And then we're going to go ahead and put some sparkling sugar on. You can do a good sprinkling over everything. This is now ready to go in that preheated 350 degree oven. So our chocolate milk bread is out of the oven. It's completely cool and it smells so good. Let's cut into it and look at that beautiful crumb. You can see those nice pockets of melty chocolate chips. If you remember, this was a really enriched bread, so it had that extra milk powder, it had butter, it had egg, it had sugar, and that gives us that really nice, soft crumb. All right, it's time to give it a try. If you noticed, I took a bite right out of the top because I wanted that nice sugary crust here, and not only did I get that, I got that nice melty chocolate chip right there. It's soft, it's squishy, it's delicious. You want to bake it.